Hi, everyone. If you're just joining us, we will wait momentarily as people enter the virtual space. If you're already here, good afternoon, happy Monday. We'll just pause momentarily. All right, and as folks continue to log on, we'll go ahead and start. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia, a bookseller with Politics and Prose. We're live with Rachel Cusk and Makenna Goodman discussing Second Place, with special thanks to the Community Bookstore in Brooklyn, New York. You can follow the links in the chat to purchase the book from both Politics and Prose and Community Bookstore. And we also want to mention that Politics and Prose is offering a class on Rachel Cusk's Outline trilogy. Follow the link in the chat for more information. If you have a question this afternoon, use the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your screen. We'll move to questions in the last portion of the hour, though we apologize in advance if we run short on time. We're also happy to offer closed captioning for this event via Zoom's closed captioning service. If you want to enable the captions, click the CC Live transcript icon at the bottom of the screen. And we do want to thank all of you out there for joining us. We're very grateful to our family of loyal customers who keep our business and our spirits afloat. It is my pleasure to introduce this incredible book. A woman invites a famous artist to use her guest house in the remote coastal landscape where she lives with her family. Powerfully drawn to his paintings, she believes his vision might penetrate the mystery at the center of her life. But as a long, dry summer sets in, his provocative presence itself becomes an enigma and disrupts the calm of her secluded household. Second Place, Rachel Cusk's electrifying new novel, is a study of female fate and male privilege, the geometries of human relationships, and the moral questions that animate our lives. It reminds us of art's capacity to uplift and to destroy. Cusk will be in conversation with Makenna Goodman, author of The Shame. She has written for the New York Review of Books, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Electric Literature, Literary Hub, Catapult, Harvard Review, The White Review, and Bomb, with interviews and other words in the Paris Review, Guernica, the Rumpus, and Commonplace Podcast. On behalf of Politics and Prose, please join me in welcoming Rachel Cusk and Makenna Goodman. Thank you both.
Congratulations, Rachel.
Thank you.
I'm so honored to be.
I'm not quite sure what on.
Your book, you're amazing.
Looking at the technology of doing this virtual event.
Being here. Thank you again to Community Bookstore and Politics and Prose for co-hosting this event, which I gather is your only live US event for Second Place. Is that right?
That's right. If live it is. I'm waiting for the physical dimension to return.
Me too. With bated breath. Anyway, when I wanted to say congratulations on Second Place. I'm gonna hold it up again because it is such a brilliant book. I absolutely loved it. I can say that with like 5 hearts worth of admiration, and I loved it. And I'm so excited to talk to you about it. But when I heard that you had a new novel out, I didn't know what to expect. How could Rachel Cusk follow her brilliant trilogy, which upended so many literary norms and paved the way for a new kind of approach to the novel? And I read a recent review in the London Review of Books that compared your writing to, and I quote, a jeweler's steel blade cleaving faceted gems out of rough stone. It represents a new mode of organizing the fragments of perspective that the trilogy exploded. A de-annihilated novel and a very good one. I like this description, and I'm curious what your take is on this narrative that I feel I've heard in different ways and read in different ways, that your recent work is about deconstruction or erasure or annihilation. And I'm just curious if that's something you agree with, or if it's a misidentification of your work, or just in general, what's your narrative of your work?
I guess I see it as not destruction or annihilation, but trying to break ground, trying to find a path or a way forward that I guess, I mean, that does involve some spurning maybe of, or seeming to spurn elements of the novel and elements of literary culture. But I guess I reached a point where I felt that to serve identity, to serve new ways of being, there did have to be some kind of walking away from the patterns in which expression is so like some old city, those streets and buildings have been there for a long time, and we, whether unconsciously or not, follow those patterns. And so I suppose it was really wanting to get those roads out of to rid myself of those roads and sort of automatic directions. So yeah, as I say, it's not so much a destruction as a long walk into the wilderness.
I like that. Interesting that you say wilderness, because one of the things I love so much about the book was it felt like such a study of place in a way. Just the idea, I mean, obviously it's called Second Place, and the first thing it struck me when the narrator, and I don't know how many people who are here have actually read the book, and I don't want to give too much away, but the narrator is walking through a gallery, and she discovers this brilliant painter's work in Paris, and she says when seeing Elle, his name is Elle, when seeing Elle's paintings for the first time, she felt, I am here. And then I'm curious about this idea of place in regards to Second Place. So on the one hand, like a non-place of female artistry that's never quite fully embodied, perhaps. And then literally it's a second house that the narrator M has, a kind of guest cottage that she loves the space, and yet she worries it may be reserved for her daughter, it may never be for her, and she wants to offer it to this brilliant artist to come stay and paint. And then there's the marsh on which she lives, which is the physical place outside her home. And it's just, there's this passage I just wanted to read. Rachel, I talked about this. I'm going to read some of her words, but you write, it rained for 5 days straight, and the earth got darker, and the grass got greener, and the trees drank with their heads down and their branches bowed. The gutters once more dripped into the water butts, and everywhere you went, you could hear the constant ticking sound the drops made when they fell. The marsh lay sullen in the distance, cloaked in a cloud, although sometimes a bar of cold white light would appear there and frozenly burn. It was a mysterious sight, this opalescent form, far, far out and all coldly alight. It did not seem to emanate from the sun, and there was a frigid godliness to it that things lit by the sun do not possess. So beautiful. I'm just curious about place and how it resonates with you.
So I guess the big kind of project for me with Second Place was thinking about location, something needing to have a location. And that's something for me, well, I mean, that's a question about painting versus writing, and something that I've become increasingly interested in is the location in itself of a visual work, and how almost locationless a written work is. And I guess that also in my head connected with femininity as a location, or as something that is lacking a location. And, you know, when I sort of thought about, I guess the beginnings of female truth in the Gothic, in you know, Jane Eyre, or those books, in a sense, are structured in quite a painterly way in terms of locations, the attic, the, you know, you know, how those early women writers used spaces in a very concrete way, not particularly in a descriptive way, but as actual locations where certain emotions, for instance, were held, or and I guess that idea goes all the way up to Virginia Woolf and A Room of Your Own, and all of that idea of this female creativity somehow coming with a need for space or location attached. And I mean, this is something that women writers have grappled with all through the 20th century, is domesticity, and how to be as a woman, how to escape in physical space, the demands on one's time. So there was a sort of element of play, I guess, in giving Second Place such a Gothic setting, and but it was also a true location in terms of I suppose experience of a landscape, as well as experience of a domestic space.
It's interesting because thinking about the marsh and how kind of what a place of, in a way, a remote place, a seemingly rural place, a place of refuge in a way, and also kind of a place of exile, where it's almost like they're at the end of the world, the end of the earth. And then of course there's these subtle clues about what might be happening in the world outside of what felt like, it almost felt like you were looking from above and there was sort of this topographical map and then a lit box, and inside the lit box was like a tableau of the novel, almost as if it were a play that you, the writer, were like manipulating little chess pieces. But anyway, I'm just curious about the idea of exile for you in this book, and how it relates to utopia, because there are these sort of moments where I think to myself while reading, something horrible is happening out there, and here they are together, the last men on earth. And then on the other hand, this might be perfect, just the five of them and their, dysfunctional little unit. Like what's that about?
I mean, it's something I've always been interested in, is the exile / utopia idea, and the great desire to escape, that is, I suppose, one form in which artistic suffering, if artists can be said to suffer, perhaps what they suffer from is a profound ambivalence about who they are in society, or a level of pain about being creatures in society who can't entirely belong to society, who are condemned to observe it. So that idea of sort of getting away, and whether that's actually being sent away, being condemned, or whether in fact it's a dream of being somewhere where the only people who are there are people who understand you. So and I mean, the some of the source material of the book lies in the sort of early or the roots of Taos in New Mexico, and that whole idea of that as a landscape where writers and artists could come and express themselves. So yeah, I can't remember what the second part of your question is. Just
I can't really either. But
okay.
I think I said, what's up with that? Or it was whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think there was so much about, like, I had this feeling while reading that this tension that you had built so beautifully with your sentences, that I wanted out. I wanted to get out of this place that they were in. And yet I never wanted to leave at the same time, because it seemed as if, as you just said, as the narrator could make sense of everything in her world with herself as its nucleus. And that sort of like the vein of the whatever you would call it, the stream in the marsh. She could like follow those out to sea, but she would never go to sea. She would never get in a boat and go and never come back. And I liked her there. And I'm curious about, I don't know, like your process when you were writing it. Like, when you write, are you in place? Are you writing from where you're at, or are you somewhere else in mind and body? Does it matter where you are when you're writing and what you're writing about?
Gosh, that's an interesting question. I mean, yes, in that concentration can be disturbed and destroyed quite easily. So, and my writing process is very it's an active sustained concentration, so I need to be in a kind of bunker situation to do that, which was a thing that I had constructed for myself and used to write this book. I mean, what I had in mind for various reasons, some of them personal and some of them I suppose the artistic consequences of the work that I'd done, that I needed to find some way of maintaining a distance from narrative reality, and while rather enjoying kind of telling a story, but it felt kind of sort of semi-surprisingly to me, I began to see as it sort of took shape that in fact this sort of detachment from reality was quite intense, and the thing was becoming quite fable-like, and yeah, that was a sort of interesting effect that I suppose because I so deeply believed in the voice of my narrator as something that was coming out of somewhere much less easy to describe and locate than just this particular woman at this particular place in time. It seemed to come out of I suppose a cave of not silence exactly, but of powerlessness and of entrapment within entrapment of the female voice, within itself. So her sort of, I mean, I guess what I felt was that voice was creating a world as it went along. It was almost telling a story, that as you might tell a story to a child, or and I mean, that's not normally the kind of thing that I would trust very much, but I really did trust it in this moment. It seemed like that separation from the world was a kind of retreat, I guess, in which some of these elements of writing, of telling, of could actually be slowed down and really looked at in a three-dimensional way all around them as much more concrete things. So it felt, I mean, I guess what I was trying to do in the book was get much closer to a visual process, a process that a visual artist might use. It's something I've thought about for a very, very long time, and how an image is created visually as opposed to in words. And so that was really what I was, without knowing at all whether I was succeeding or how I had even decided that was how to do it. That was what I was trying to do.
Interesting, because Elle, who's the artist who comes to live in the narrator's second place, seems to want to paint the portrait of everyone in the kind of new unit, except for the narrator, who kind of she can't understand it, and she wants it so badly. She wants to be seen by him and painted by him and sort of understood by him. And what you just said about writing this in a way that a painter might, or a visual artist might approach a subject, I keep thinking about how you've done it. Like it's but it's not a portrait, rather. It's like, I mean, this is just me riffing right here, but it's like they're all together in one frame. You've painted each of them. Maybe it's a series, or maybe it's one painting with all of them in the same room. But a whole world of these kind of fully fleshed out forms has been created, but not in a descriptive way. Like I can't think of any, and this is very you. I feel like you managed to write about the essence of something and not describe it with kind of offhanded adjectives. Like you have no use for the adjective. I'm sure you use it, but
I keep them in my cupboard just in case.
Very sparingly. But you don't need them, because the feeling of the person in the room kind of emanates on the page. Kind of like in a portrait, it's kind of a miracle that they look like the person at all just by using paint. In terms of you spoke about New Mexico, and I know that a lot of people have been asking you about, what was the inception of this book? And, the last page, you say, this is in the spirit of Mabel Dodge Luhan and whatnot. And I don't necessarily want to ask you anything about that, but I am interested in the idea of repurposing one thing for another in the context of art, as you just explained it. Like a still life, that kind of thing. It's a rambly question, but I want you to keep talking about it.
No, I was very much in two minds about whether to acknowledge that source. I mean, as a point of honor and respect, there was no question. It was something I absolutely, that was the correct thing to do. And yet, I guess that set up a whole, I mean, I sort of thought my book wouldn't really be understood without that. And yet putting that in creates a much bigger opportunity for it to be misunderstood and for it to become, I guess, literalized, which I'm guessing has happened a bit. And that's, I guess, unfortunate, because exactly as you say, the repurposing of a text was a really, really big part of this, and a big part of how I found a pathway sort of out of the trilogy, out of the style of outline, and because I suppose if you're me at this point, in terms of what I'm doing and what I have done and how long it's taken me to get to the top of this particular mountain that for some reason I've decided to try and climb, which is I guess serving some definition of female experience that I've sort of set my mind to. It was not easy for me to know if I would ever find anywhere to go next, and so this sort of instant, I mean, I found Mabel Dodge Luhan's book completely by coincidence, and immediately understood that this, I mean, I think I said to you in an email, this it was like the kind of cracked pot that gets dug up in the archaeological dig, this thing that had been sort of disused or buried, or it like a sort of hermit crab. I thought, okay, here's this thing, and I can go and live in it, and give it a purpose again, and express myself in it. And I think what made that vessel so suited to my purposes and so interesting to me was the sound that it made, and the sound that this female voice made, that was essentially, and I mean, I haven't read very much about the response to the book, but there's always a criticism of Mabel Dodge Luhan in any review of what a terrible person she was. So she's still arousing this hostility in people, in women, and to me that just says so much about I guess the basis of culture in egotism, and what culture without egotism sounds like. It sounds quite annoying to people. I suppose it's misread as egotism, but the fact is it isn't, because it's without status, it's without the male values by which status is achieved in culture. So it's incredible to me that a woman still, even if she's dead and her book has been buried, and a woman is still, if she pops her head up and tries to tell the truth in the particular way that she does, and I guess I tried to, they'll yes get rocks thrown at them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I was going to ask you about I have all of my questions here, and I was, I agree, and I think, well, why do we care? What is it about what Mabel Dodge said back in whenever the book was written? I mean, wasn't it like 1920 or something like that, or in the 1920s? Like, by what right do we have to review history with our contemporary lens, and what's the point of it? And that's not what, how I took what you were doing. It's more just, it reminds me a little bit of like the French filmmaker Agnes Varda, who, and also Annie Ernaux, who I know you also have read, the French writer. Sorry to keep talking about French people, but like this idea of documentary and fiction living side by side, and what happens when you combine the two. And you obviously do this brilliantly in your work as well. And I just don't, it's curious to me how one would think now in this sort of post-feminist world, which some people think we supposedly live in, that women should be kind of allowed to speak about reason and philosophy without being accused of being egotists. And I'm curious about your take on the deification and the conversation around male artists who are continued to be held up on high pedestals. I'm thinking of Philip Roth. Like, people can't stop thinking or talking about him and the napkins that he wrote on and whatnot. And why is it that despite all the things that we might learn about someone like that, somehow the status is still retained? And yet, I'm just curious, I don't mean to over-gender the conversation, but I'm curious what your take is on that.
Well, I mean, it's true that the Annie Ernaux and Agnes Vardas and of this world have to. I mean, it comes back to this question of location, and those women stand out because they succeed in creating a location for themselves. And what always defines that success is that the location is new. It's unrecognizable. They've had to actually build their own building to put themselves in, and I guess in a long, slow process that creates that breaking of ground, that creates possibilities for new people. It creates places for new people to go to in terms of thinking about expression and creativity, but it takes time, and yeah, I mean, the Philip Roths of this world, I guess I think, why do people continue to respect their parents? Why do, for instance, given that we all know, all of the things we know, authority is hard to turn away from, and yeah, I think there's a feeling of, I mean, there certainly is still an extraordinary, and I'm not one I don't like to sort of wring my hands about anything, because I think, well, you know, people can do what they want, and if they want to buy a hamburger rather than a book, they can do that, and if a bookshop wants to sell a hamburger rather than a book, you know, they can do that too. And I don't see culture or writing as having any privileged status at all. It you know, it has to sort of prove itself, but it is still the case that those figures command, they still have extraordinary power, and that the women who, and this is, I suppose, the thing that I sort of hold against that model, is that for a woman to succeed still, she succeeds better by adopting male values as a creator, than by doing what Annie Ernaux's done. So, and you know, that's true in society. It's true, you know, that for a woman to, if she actually is being a woman, there are so many things that are not open to her. And any girl right now today being, you know, pressurized to do well in her exams, while at the same time thinking, oh, I'm also meant to have children and meant to, you know, is in the process of sort of weighing up those things and making those decisions.
That's interesting. I mean, it brings up a question about projection and sort of Freudian, like the Oedipal complex or psychoanalysis, that I was curious about, because I know you've talked about it in the past, and there was definitely, and it could just be my lens on things, there were definitely these moments where I thought, oh, well, is M the narrator, is her frustration that L, the painter, won't paint her portrait, and her sort of obsession with getting him to want to, is that a frustration with herself for wanting that or needing that in order to feel seen? And perhaps
no, I think it's a great, she runs kind of smack into the I suppose the question of post biological femininity, the continuation of femininity beyond its forms and roles, the feeling of redundancy, and the I guess the unwrittenness or undescribed space that is ahead of a woman after she has been a woman in these various different ways, and so I think it's that invisibility, that question about, I guess, one's history as a woman, what one's womanhood has been, and the feeling, I mean, I think it's sort of at some point says this in Second Place, that it's almost a feeling, a sudden realization that you've been tricked. You've been tricked into believing in romantic love, in, you know, wanting to have children, but, you know, and so my narrator is very much a person who's just wandered out of those structures, and what she sees is I guess a male control of poetry, for want of another word, of beauty, of meaning, of all of the things that you know, coming out of one's destiny in that way, you would be thirsting for interpretation and representation and reflection, and the male control of those things, in which, you know, one is admitted, I guess, quite ambiguously as a woman, and so I guess her question is, am I invisible? Can he see me? What do I look like? What am I? So it's that kind of crisis, I guess, in a sort of fun way.
Yeah, fun. Well, it's interesting. There's this passage, and I'm hesitant to read the whole thing because I don't want to waste time with my words, even though they're your words. But when it's a short passage, and it's after, if it's all right,
Mhm.
after M comes upon, M is the narrator, and after she comes upon L and Brett, who's his kind of add-on who comes, having painted a mural on the wall of this second place that she has so generously opened up to them. And she says, "Oh, Tony," I said to him in my heart, "tell me what the truth is. Is it wrong to want things that you can't give me? Am I fooling myself into believing that it's right for us to be together just because it's easier and nicer that way?" For the first time, Jeffers, I considered the possibility that art, not just L's art, but the whole notion of art, might itself be a serpent, whispering in our ears, sapping away all our satisfaction and our belief in the thing of this world, with the idea that there was something higher and better within us, which could never be equaled by what was right in front of us. The distance of art suddenly felt like nothing but the distance in myself, the coldest, loneliest distance in the world from true love and belonging. Tony, her husband, didn't believe in art. He believed in people, their goodness and their badness. And he believed in nature. He believed in me. And I believed in this infernal distance in myself and in all things, in which their reality could be transmuted. This is just like it's such a true, for me, just like the truest feeling of a misidentification in the self, of the inability or the unwillingness to see what one might be in the interest of what one thinks others might see of oneself, and just how trapped so much of us are in that space, and how reading words like these and sentences like these reminds me that I'm not alone, reminds me, it's sort of like touching something golden and then feeling it pulse. It's like, oh, I recognize that and it's beautiful, so it must have something to do with me. And therefore I feel better about myself. Thank you. No, but just like this idea, and I don't know, you've talked about morality and how you write with a kind of moral duty, which I wanted to ask you about, because to me, if I were to do away with categorizations in general, I might say, well, Rachel Cusk is a philosopher. I mean, there's parts, the way that you write, which resonate on a classical level for me, and others too. And I'm curious about meaning and truth and how art fits into that, and your way in to that large question.
Well, it's a very pertinent question right now, because one of the things I've been very aware of latterly is a change in my relationship to reality and to lived experience, and for good or ill, you know, the way that I felt entitled, the only way that I felt entitled to pass through life as a writer was to remain within the compass of myself, and to be secure in my ownership of a self, and therefore my ownership of the material that myself contained, and that as a moral position seemed to me pretty impregnable, even if, you know, everyone shouts along the way and thinks you're narcissistic or egotistical, which is, and the complete reverse is true of anybody who chooses that path. You're essentially treating yourself as nothing, almost nothing, except a location, quite a small one, but one where everything can be verified, and so you know that for all the trouble you've taken, you know, you will at least have a chance of telling the truth, and suddenly that has no meaning for me anymore. Myself as a location has no meaning for me anymore, and almost writing Second Place is my swan song. It was sort of okay, you know, this idea of the self essentially becoming redundant or meaningless, redundant in other people's eyes, maybe redundant in society's eyes, middle-aged woman, redundant in one's own eyes, I don't know, meaningless because there's no task for that person, and there's no place in nature where she would naturally go, where she is entitled to go, and she can go backwards, but in terms of, or she can go forward in a kind of funny way, but so suddenly suddenly truth doesn't adhere to lived experience anymore in that space, and so yeah, I guess the massive question for me is, well, having got here, is what I'm left with I guess a philosophical language or location, is in fact that's what I'm walking out of here with. But the things that I have deduced from, extrapolated from living, that are no longer going hand in hand with living, they're going to have to survive on their own, and I'm going to have to find some different way of representing them. And I guess Second Place is kind of the beginning of that process of finding someone else's location to put my things in, and I have no idea how, whether that is final and permanent, but it does, I guess it's a question of confidence, because although I feel that I have discovered for myself something that I always suspected, which is that it is possible to understand anything in the world simply by being an honest self and truly examining what you know. And I think that's true, and I think the fact that I'm I'm left with this knowledge sort of says that it's true. But yeah, the question is sort of where to put it and what to do with it, and words. Having to do it in words is problematic too.
Well, it's interesting to think about the difference between the location of the self being a non-place, and yet the self continuing to create. That there's obviously a drive deep within, regardless of sort of social things that drive you to continue to make sense of the world in ways that are like that golden pulsing rock. And I'm thinking too about this non-place of you and your work in terms of categorization and the media, and how it seems, regardless of the fact that you have been accepted in so many ways into this place of status in the literary world as a icon, as a brilliant mind of this century and the last, and what am I saying? And yet also people's inability to be able to categorize you in any one way. And I think about Annie Ernaux, and how I believe in France she's called a novelist, but in the US they call her a memoirist. That her work
the French don't like memoirs. They don't accept that credit card here.
And then I think of the sort of Elena Ferrante pseudonym space of like, don't look at me, look at my work, and how that worked to a certain degree to distract us from our sort of gendered desire to keep women out of some authority place. I don't know, but I don't know. I guess what I want to know, and then I'll open it up. I'll ask a few questions of others as well from the audience. Well, yeah. I mean, do you think that art is a way in to truth, a way in to mine into the non-place, to, you know, to kind of strip away the chaos and shine something that can offer us a map? Or is it a way out? Is it a way to liberate from something that otherwise is entrapment? I guess this is back to the Exile utopia question, but like,
I mean, I guess I think it's sanity. It's that's what it is. That's as good a definition of art as I can think of, is that it is sanity, and that is the hardest thing to retain faith in as an artist, that when you create, you are ultimately sane, and yet I think you know, that is what it is. I mean, for me, all of the problems now come from language as a medium, and it really is the most impossible medium at this point. And you know, I think, I mean, I'm not going to start talking about social media, or, you know, I don't use any of those things, and I'm really sort of pro them and think that they've liberated a lot of people from authority, and including young people, and so I think it's all good. But in terms of using language, it's pretty hard to sort of know, to feel confident, I guess, to know quite where to go linguistically, and as I said earlier, my my serious yearning to be a non-language based artist is really just feeling that the forum of language is a big heaving you know, fighting, you know, people are fighting to get control of identity, I guess, or to make language serve identity in different ways. And I mean, that's all really exciting and interesting and difficult. And but as a language user trying to I guess withdraw a little bit from that, language feels very dangerous, and the fear of clumsiness is in terms of, as I say, this very very politicized world of language that we now live in. So I don't know, you know, that's another kind of problem. It's another conundrum of yeah, feeling that there's a question of being allowed to write things, or not allowed to write things, or you know, all of which, yeah, I mean, it may result in the overthrow of these titanic male figures in culture, which great, but for somebody like me, it creates a lot of cross currents that are difficult to get through.
Yeah, and it begs the question, is that allowing or not allowing of people to continue to press against the edge of a norm or a culture, is that serving the same system that in fact keeps those titans in power, even if not the next Philip Roth, perhaps they're behind the desk of the person who's the next Philip Roth. And I think, you know, it's funny, I keep thinking of this word that sounds really alarmist, but it keeps coming to mind, which is dangerous. And I think about how your work feels dangerous to me in terms of the way that it perplexes some critics or some people, as if it's a threat, as sort of challenging the very notion, the very bedrock of what we have come to rely on, you know, sort of like when you're a kid and your friend says to you, you know, your mother's cooking is actually really bad. And even if it is, you'd want to defend her because, you know, she's your mother, and how dare your friend say this. And I love this about your work, because I do feel that in a way, you are a kind of, you're continuing to do something that is so on the forefront of language, something that is not able to be reduced by a critical sentence that's masterfully wrought. It's like, because you're, I don't want to say above that, but you're beyond that. You're like at a different, you're in a different place. And I feel as though we're chasing along behind you. And I want that to be shouted from the rooftops, that yeah, I think not being able to confine in a description means that something unbelievable is at play. So I'm just going to say that. And our friend Sheila Hetty, I have to say, because here she is, she's in the chat in the Q&A, and she has 6 thumbs up from people. So other people agree that her task. What is the task of the middle-aged woman, in quotes? And I don't know what the middle-aged woman is, because some people think I'm middle-aged and some people might think, I don't know what middle-aged is, but what is the task?
Is that Sheila's question?
Good question.
That's because she's cross. I think what that means is, why are you talking about middle-aged women having no task? And why should they have a task? And I guess if you're well, I mean, I suppose looking at things from my perspective, which is not everybody's, it's a very domestic perspective, and it's a perspective in which I have, and I mean, this is, sorry to talk personally rather than artistically, but in the end, it explains, you know, something about the work that I've done. You know, I haven't ever really been free, and so I think that lack of freedom, and it's a thing that I, possibly to the point of boring all my readers to death, to talk a lot about in my work, what actually is freedom. And one might think that the task of the middle-aged woman would be to be free. But back to your, where we started, which is it exile, or is it utopia and seclusion? Is it freedom, or is it redundancy? And I think that feeling of not being sure whether the whole of femininity has been a trick that you fell for, is a knife edge question for an awful lot of women, and so what could the task be? I guess to cement oneself in a attitude to that, or in a perspective on that, and to cease to suffer.
Beautiful. There's another question about, and I think, I mean, this is something that, you know, you can feel free to say, no, I don't want to answer that. But is there anything that you think the critics or the public are missing or misinterpreting about the book, or anything you want known about it?
About this book?
Yeah, I mean, this is Marcy's question.
I mean, I've barely read any reviews, because at this point I try and spare myself that horror. Yeah, I'd say it's probably been pretty roundly misunderstood, would be my guess. And as I say, I believe I set that hair running myself by ever mentioning Mabel Dodge Luhan in the first place, because, you know, my intention, which was to make a kind of installation in her, has, because there's only so many ways that we can, I suppose, the culturally normal ways that one reads this kind of thing, biography, history, homage, you know, whatever it might be. But in fact, it seems like I did read one review that 90% of the review was a retelling of Mabel Dodge Luhan's life. and then there was a very little bit about, you know, so from that extreme of my book being a footnote, which I don't mind. I mean, that, you know, that's perfectly fine, because I really respect Mabel's voice, her writing, who she was. Yeah, so I think I guess the strangeness, the existential strangeness of what I've done in proposing this reused book might not, you know, that might be a bit of of interest to writers, and yet I think there are much bigger questions that come from that about forms and indeed forms of living and influence, and how we receive and enact identity, and who our role models are, who are, you know, how do we, you know, decide or learn to be ourselves, and so I guess that, you know, someone could, if they really cared to understand the book in that way, not because they're interested in Mabel Dodge Luhan, but because they're interested in the idea of finding a home in, just to speak completely spuriously, but finding a home in someone who is not their parent. You know, like you might find a woman who you'd rather have as your mother than the mother you actually got, and so something of that sort, I guess, could be understood from the book. But yeah, I don't think it has been.
Yeah, and I think this is another question that somebody asked about the market, and what leads me to ask this question is thinking about the idea of the salon. And I don't want to belabor the point about Mabel Dodge Luhan, but she did gather great minds, and she's famous for having gathered great minds. She's not, in fact, famous for Lorenzo and Taos, or well, maybe a little bit, but really it was that she created this space so that these minds could gather, and it was entirely off book. You know, here was a salon that in, you know, whatever it was, 1911 in Greenwich Village, this was before Taos, was where Freudian psychoanalysis was first introduced in these small circle of radicals. That's entirely radical and anti-institutional. And so the media's interest in her, I have read some of the reviews, and I find they completely missed the point, because, I mean, for all the reasons that we just discussed, and also because it's about the space of freedom that you discuss, where ideas can be batted around without being without the market and capitalism, or neoliberalism, or just, you know, the kind of encroachment of the status quo. And I feel like that's the space in which your work resides. And this question is, says, as an emerging writer, I get a lot of advice from more successful published writers to think about the market. And I've struggled because I've received rejections that say, essentially, I like your work, but don't see it fitting into the marketplace. And this person's interested to know, Rachel, if you think, or if at some point in your career thought about the market, or if thinking about your work in Catapult.
I have never. I probably should have. I should have thought about something. I think I probably should have thought about a little more about. Although I don't think I can have these thoughts, so there would have been no point in me thinking about them. I wish I'd known a bit more how provoked people would be by my work. I definitely, and I still can't see it. I would still be completely capable of writing something and not understanding that it was going to be provocative. And so, in terms of actually thinking about the market, that's a, as I say, that would be very far down my list of thoughts. No, the only asset you have is yourself, your unique self. That is it. That is, as an artist, the only asset you have. And you can be talented, a bit less talented, but the further away you go from that asset, yeah, I mean, maybe if you think about the market, you'll have one successful book, but if you want to have more than that, and if you want to be actually unique. Your own uniqueness is the thing not to let go of. So any thought about how you would doll yourself up or deform yourself to serve someone's idea of what's popular and successful. And the fact is that I remember once a friend of mine came to I'm going to try and tell the story without naming names, but came to a party at my publisher's and just fell into conversation with the sort of chief executive of this very noble publishing house and said to him, how do you create, how do you sell a book? How do you create sales for a book? How do you make a book successful? And the guy said, I have absolutely no idea. So, because there is no science to it. I don't think publishers know why things are successful. The only thing they know is that something has been successful. And so then the advice would be to do something like that. But that's usually, if something's already been successful, that trick is probably not going to work twice. So don't think about the market.
Hi, everyone. I would love to continue with the conversation, but we are nearing the end of the hour. Any final thoughts, Makenna and Rachel, before we send you off with this beautiful book?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I did want to ask what's currently exciting you and if you're in a period of research for something new.
Oh, well, I've just moved to France, and so it's not exciting me that I have to very, very, very much improve my language skills, but it's preoccupying me. So there's that. And yeah, writing about art, I guess, is something that I'm doing quite a lot of, and trying to think of. I've got a work. It's coming out of the fog. A work is coming out of the fog somehow, and but I can't see what it is yet. So yeah.
Well, we of course can't wait to see what's coming next. For now, we just really want to thank Rachel Cusk, Makenna Goodman, of course, Community Bookstore in Brooklyn, and our audience out there for tuning in and for your engaging questions. Your patronage and dedication enable us to bring you this amazing programming, and we couldn't do it without the book sales to support it. So please follow the link in the chat to purchase your copy of Second Place. And we will see you next time, everyone. We hope you are out there staying strong, staying safe, and staying well-read. Have a great rest of your Monday, a great rest of your week.
Bye, Rachel.
Bye.